Hey, just want to give you a heads up. We recorded this up here in Northern Ontario, Cottage Country, and the sound quality is horrendous. Lots of click sounds, lots of noise. I decided to publish the issue anyway because the content is pretty good, but if you can handle the noise, give it a shot and let us know what you think. Good luck.
Good morning. It's August 8th, 2018. Here in Cottage Country at Mostly Linux on Mostly Gaming is ready to roll now. We are coming to you from Cottage Country here in Ontario, Canada. It's a beautiful place, but before we get into that, let me introduce our distro of the week. This week we're featuring Ubuntu Budgie 18.04 on my Dell XPS 13. Not able to be on my production machine in the home office today, so I've got my laptop here at the cottage and we're rolling this way. It feels this is the standard XPS 13 with a 1080p screen. It feels a little crowded, to be honest with you. I'm used to having the 4K monitor that gives me a lot more room. So, here at 1080p, it, particularly on a single screen, it feels a little crowded. But Ubuntu is your standard distribution, as you can see here. I'm not a huge fan of Ubuntu. I find it a little cumbersome. The main issue, there's a couple of issues for me. First of all, I find that it chooses Libre or Freedom or whatever over user usability. So its desire not to incorporate any proprietary software actually makes the experience for the user more cumbersome, and I think that's a typical Linux challenge in terms of providing an off-the-shelf solution that is all free. But it would help if you installed some additional proprietary software that nearly every user uses anyway. That's kind of the one problem. That's not a huge issue for me that I have with Ubuntu. The other issue is really just that it is it's a bit ugly. Although the Budgie desktop is my kind of desktop environment of choice. Budgie on Ubuntu is really well optimized. It makes Ubuntu. It gives me. I like GNOME in terms of the software that they provide, along with the desktop environment and the Nautilus file system and the disk manager. All of those apps that they provide in GNOME are terrific. I use them all the time. One of the reasons I find KDE, in terms of using the Plasma interface, less appealing is I don't want to use the KDE disk tools or the file manager or the apps that come along with the KDE environment. I would rather use GNOME, but I don't like the GNOME layout and look. So Budgie is really a bridge between those two. It provides me with a more pleasant desktop environment while giving me the benefit of using the GNOME applications. As you can see, Budgie is structured, in a way similar to GNOME in some ways with respect to the panels, although it doesn't have the side panel here. It has the window at the bottom, and then the settings applets over here on the other side. I'm not going to give it a full description here. What I'll say is that I really enjoy Budgie. I'm a fan of Solus, as those of you that have listened to my podcast over the last few months would know. But Ubuntu is your standard. This is a production machine, so I don't constantly bring up new distros and so forth. Ubuntu will work. It provides me the flexibility, the widest app support. It gives me access to Debian files and so forth, so that I know that pretty well whatever I want to run will run, and that is why you use Ubuntu. It is the standard that everybody targets when they're developing software, and for a production machine, that's what I need. I need dependability and uptime. And the XPS 13 is a terrific little machine. I'm using the 1-year-old version of the machine here, so I've got a couple of USB C connectors, the typical ones that basically, rather than the Thunderbolt or the smaller versions, although it doesn't have an HDMI port, so I need an adapter for that. But that's okay. I mean, I can handle that. It's a terrific machine. I highly recommend it. It's my daily driver. It's what I use at work. It's what I use when I'm not at my desktop, and it's what I use when playing the occasional game on my little machine here. But enough about Ubuntu. Let's take a look at where I am. So I am, without being overly specific, I'm here in northern Ontario, where, as you can see here, the water is beautiful and crisp and wonderful. It's been very, very hot this summer, and so the lake water is beautiful. I would say it's probably in the high 70s, maybe low 80s in terms of the temperature of the water, which is like bath water. That's in Fahrenheit. In Celsius, I would put it probably in the mid 20s. Maybe mid to low 20s, somewhere in that range in any case. But it's warm enough that when you go into the water, you don't feel like you're going to freeze to death. And the lakes up here are a good size, but they're small enough that they will warm up in the summer. Most of these are fed through the Great Lakes and through some mountains that we have in the area. So they tend to be pretty cold at the beginning of the year. Certainly by May and June, the water would be very cold. In May in particular, in the rainy season, you're going to be basically awash in mosquitoes here. But by July and August and September, it's warmed up. The water is beautiful. Mosquitoes are all dead, and we can enjoy the outdoors. Here's another look at it here, right, in terms of the deck. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm enjoying it, and yeah, I'm getting all sorts of messages now. And I'm recording this as a result a little bit early so that I don't, I don't miss the episode. I've got a commitment not to miss my Sunday morning show, so I'm actually recording this Friday night. Yeah, I want to get this done, put it to bed, and maybe go out for a little swim. In any case, let's take a break right there, and we'll be back in 10 seconds and start the show. And we're back. Thanks for sticking with us here on Mostly Linux, on Mostly Gaming. And we've got a few news stories here. I think we've got 4 in total. Is this acquisition of OpenSUSE or OpenSUSE for a couple of $1 billion. And, to be perfectly honest, I think that's a very good sign in the value of the Linux ecosystem. But I don't know. I could care less. I don't know anybody that uses OpenSUSE, or it's actually SUSE that was acquired. OpenSUSE is the open version of it. I think it's mostly a corporate or a server-based system. I will be the first one to tell you I don't know much about it. I've never used it. I think everybody has moved on, at least that was my view, away from that to Arch or to other distributions. But clearly not, because it sold for a crap ton of money. But I don't think my listeners care. We're not propeller heads. We're kind of enthusiasts. And I think the first story here, just from an enthusiast perspective, is this article that I saw that came out from a presumably computer expert that asked the question, should you declare Windependence? And here is the article here. It's Tom's Hardware for noob. And the author of the story is this gentleman here, who is, I think he's the chief editor or something. I really, really, really dislike this thing here. Okay, like stop. Don't stick a video in my browser, please. Anyway, let's take a look. Who is this guy? So this guy is Avram Pitch. Avram Pitch. He's on Twitter as Geek in Chief. What do you do with a degree in English? Build websites for a computer magazine, of course. So he's the Geek in Chief of, I guess. He wrote this article here. Should you declare Windependence? I switched to Linux to find out. And he switched to Linux for 1 week. 1 week, and he switched back. And this, the reason I bring it up is most of this article is, I'd say, reasonably positive here and there. I think most of the negative comments are clearly from a lack of knowledge, patience, or just willingness to really figure things out. But it provides us with some good insight into the barriers that even experienced individuals who tried Linux have. If you've been using Linux for years, it seems like it's pretty obvious. It seems like it's pretty straightforward. But if you haven't, even if you're an experienced person, you're going to run into some of these problems. So let's go through this article. The person here, so what's his name again? Avram, says that he's been using Linux as my primary OS for home and work for the better part of a week. The better part of a week, so that means not a full week. My experience has been frustrating at times, but mostly rewarding, which is very good. So he says here that he's not an expert, but he's not exactly a newbie. Just reading from the article here. The open source OS is like an old college friend I see once every few years, then forget about until they post something outrageous in Facebook. Over the past 2 decades, I've tried several different flavors, from Red Hat in the late 1990s to Ubuntu just a few years ago. I've also used Raspbian on my Raspberry Pi. However, I've never employed Linux as my primary OS for several days in a row. So several days in a row. Now let me just say, Avram, you're not really being fair to Linux by basically saying you've tried this for a few days and the last time was a couple of years ago. But in any case, he decided to basically go with Linux Mint. He installed it on a ThinkPad T440S with a 1080p screen. And then he basically immediately ran into problems with respect to dual booting. I think here it's just a simple issue with respect to choosing UEFI versus legacy installers. I've had this issue, to be fair to him, I've had this issue myself on my XPS 13. Moving to a dual boot is problematic because it's not very clear, and I've been in a situation where I've tried setting after setting after setting to try to figure out what is happening. I finally figured out what it is and how to set it up, but I can imagine that for somebody that is new, that would be very, very frustrating. So in this particular case, he needed to change some settings in his BIOS, and at the end of the day, it didn't work. So the grub menu didn't install properly, and he was stuck in a situation where in order to basically launch Windows, he would basically need to launch that specifically rather than from grub. And I know that is a problem if you have to do that. But to be fair to your experience with Linux, I think that if you were to use Linux on a full-time basis, that you would have figured this out. And whatever frustration that you had, in the whatever 20 minutes or 1 hour or whatever it might have taken you to basically set this up, or maybe if you had just asked some questions around for people to help you, this problem is solved once, and then you never have to deal with it again. Better yet, don't do a boot. So that's the first point. The second one is he says look and feel. The 1990s wants its icons back, and he says that it's advanced in so many ways, but this looks like a throwback to Windows 98 or Windows 2000. He says every icon was completely flat, and all the typefaces I tried looked extremely primitive and jagged. In terminal mode, which I had to use a lot, the letters weren't evenly spaced, leading to some weird gaps within words. The stripped down start menu also looks like it was designed during the Clinton administration. Okay, well, I mean, it's hard to argue with one's view of aesthetics. I personally like I'm not a huge fan of cinnamon. I talked about Linux Mint 19, and I decided to use the XFCE edition rather than the cinnamon edition, which he is using here. Having said that, using Linux for only a few days is not really conducive to basically just setting it up, spending some time setting it up, choosing the look and feel that you want to use. If you want your Linux machine to look like a Mac, you can. If you want it to look like Windows, you can. If you want it to look like something completely different, you can. If you want your icons to be flat, you can. You can have Linux your way in whatever way you want. And there are a number of prefabricated desktop environments out there that will fit your needs. And once again, if you were, and you're an experienced computer user, and you say that you are familiar with Linux, Avram, so if you really wanted to use Linux, rather than just for a day or two, you would find that there is no better looking operating system than the perfect Linux for you. And I would say whatever the look and feel that you prefer, you can find a desktop environment that is customized with the types of icons and looks and fonts that would make it look better than anything else that you are using. So I would dismiss that. I think, again, this is a situation where you haven't given it enough time. And then he talks about his themes, which is an exercise in frustration. He says here, installing desktop themes in Linux Mint is an exercise in frustration because it seems like the people who made the OS don't understand what a theme is. There are a handful of built-in themes in a library with dozens more that you can download, but there appears to be no way to just switch to a theme and have it modify your icons, fonts, desktop. Okay, so I can see this in terms of the definition of themes, but if first of all, there's no themes at all that I can remember in Windows at all. It looks like the way that it looks, and trying to change the look and feel. I think there are ways, but they're far more complicated than anything that you'll find on Linux, and certainly the same on Mac. So it's unfortunate that you didn't choose to use Linux a little longer, or maybe seek out some help, because this is also very fixable. This is the kind of thing that you run into in your first few hours of using Linux until you go to Reddit or Twitter or somewhere, and somebody that just knows more can quickly fix it for you. So that's the next point. With respect to software, he says he's got pretty much everything he needs. His one complaint is that he uses Microsoft Outlook. So I think, with all due respect to Avram, you've got to move on from Outlook. Okay, Outlook is a horrendous email program. Having said that, if that's what you want to use, there are options for you like Evolution. I'm not sure. Avram mentioned here that he ended up using. Well, let me just kind of go through here. He ended up using Skype, Stride, Slack, Zoom. All of those have Electron apps, which are good. He says Dropbox worked flawlessly. Dropbox does work flawlessly. The only complaint I have with Dropbox is on Linux it only allows me to set up one Dropbox. So I've got my business Dropbox, but I cannot include my personal Dropbox. On Windows, I can include both, which is kind of unfortunate that they haven't added that to Linux. He doesn't mention that here, but I will mention it because that's a problem that I have. He mentions that Chrome is the browser of choice, and of course, by default, and this is the issue that I was mentioning earlier on about Ubuntu as well. It's not an issue, say, with Solus, which is one of the reasons I really like Solus. Also, Ubuntu Budgie makes regular Chrome available by default. In Ubuntu, in Linux Mint, you have Chromium, and then if you want to install regular Chrome, you actually have to go and download it from the web, from Google. Look, if there's a distribution for everybody, and if you want something that is a little more broad in their interpretation of open source, then you can go through that. In this case, he ended up using Chromium, which works perfectly in any case. I mean, there are some downsides to Chromium versus Chrome, but there's also downsides the other way. I think so. Those were his points there. So he ended up finding some substitutes. This is where he complains about not having Outlook. He decided to go with MailSpring. I also use MailSpring. I like MailSpring. My one complaint with MailSpring is that the pricing for it is ridiculous. Whoever the developer is wants $8 a month US to unlock the Pro version. Now that works out to about $100 a year. I mean, I just think that is crazy for the kind of app that MailSpring is. It is a single-use email app with no calendar, and it's basically an Electron app. It's itself, I believe it's an Electron app. In any case, I'm not sure, but $100 is really what a subscription to Microsoft Office, all of Microsoft Office, is. $100 is crazy, dude, and I think I mean it pains me to use even the free version just as a matter of principle on the price there. If the guy was to use charge $20 or $25, which I think is reasonable, I'd be all in. But 8 times 12, that's a lot of money, and I think it's overreach. But there's other. I mean, you can use, for example, Evolution is effectively an Outlook clone. If you are using Outlook, switch to Evolution. I don't know why he went to MailSpring. Um, then he talks about the command prompt. While I haven't seen any data on this, I think it is safe to assume, he says, that most Windows users never go to the command prompt. You can live your whole life in Windows without ever seeing the prompt or ever knowing what it is. However, in Linux, there are still many occasions where you really might need to launch a terminal window and enter some commands. Most software is either available in the software manager, which is like an app store, or as a .deb file, which is an installer, but not all of it. During my week with Linux, I use a terminal window to install grub, all of these things that he says he's got to basically use it for. Again, the command prompt makes doing a lot of things easier. That's why you would want to use it. I mean, why would you use it if it made things more difficult? But I can say just from personal experience in using Ubuntu and using Linux Mint that if you do not ever want to use the command terminal, you don't have to. And I would say that this person was using it not because it's a downside, like, oh my gosh, I've got to use a command terminal, but because all of these things were made easier with it. There was a more difficult way to do all of these, which would require, the GUI, which is what he would do if he was in Windows, but there was a better way to do it in Linux, which is the command terminal. And then he complains about his performance and so forth. And his bottom line here is that Linux is definitely good enough to use for the kind of productivity work I do. There are some challenges, but if you have patience, you can work around most of them. If you're like me, you'll feel a great sense of satisfaction when you find a solution to a problem, as I did when I discovered how to change my track point speed. However, the bigger question is, why would you use Linux instead of Windows? If you build your own desktop and don't want to spend $90 on Windows 10, Linux is a free alternative, but most system builders want to play games, and the majority of titles on Steam don't work on Linux. If you buy a pre-built PC, it comes with Windows preloaded, so there's no economic reason to go with Linux. The best reason to save money to use Linux is not to save money, but to avoid Windows. If you're morally opposed to Windows for whatever reason, or you just like a challenge of an open source OS, you can have a good experience with Linux. So that's just kind of okay. So that's his bottom line. I think. Okay, so the article, while he kind of ends it up positively, is negative all the way through, and I take exception to that. And I think his conclusion here is also wrong with respect to the $90 on Windows 10 license. Certainly if you want a game, I can see that as being a reason to go with Windows if you want to have access to all the software. But one of the things that we talk about here on Mostly Gaming is how you can get the most out of Linux in gaming and ways to basically incorporate both Linux and Windows gaming into your Linux setup. But beyond that, I think what he misses here is when he says that the reason not to use Linux is because you're morally opposed to Windows. And I really take exception to that. I am not morally opposed to Windows. I think Linux is better. And that's one of the things that he does not, he could not understand, having used this for, quote, the better part of a week, so less than a week. Linux is better because it is better designed, it is faster, it has a better system of installing software, of managing your system, of keeping your system running. It has access, I think, to a large part with highly competitive software that I would use no matter what operating system I'm on. And it is not prone to these constant system updates, invasive telemetry data from Microsoft, and it is I guess it is better. I mean, that's the reason. The reason to use Linux, Avram, is because it is better than Windows in most ways. The only way, or the only place that Linux is not better than Windows is in compatibility for a wider number of games. And if you are a gamer, I can see why dual boot makes sense. I dual boot on my system, on my gaming system as well. But if you are not a gamer, or if that is not your use case for your machine, like on my XPS 13 right here, then Linux is better. Period. End of story. Give it more than the better part of a week, Avram. Give it the better part of a year. You will never go back if you use Linux for a year. You won't. Okay, you will find that it is not only a better, faster, safer operating system, but that it is better looking, better organized, and allows you to be more productive. And that's why you use Linux. Anyway, I will tweet you a message letting you know that I've discussed your article at length on episode .15 here. Moving on, let's take a look. Here's the Geekin chief here. Good looking guy. But anyway, our next story here is the best of 2018 so far according to Steam. These are the best-selling games of the year according to Steam. I thought we'd take a look here and see how many or which games are available on our favorite operating systems. Let's take a look here at the top sellers. These are the platinum titles, and of these are the top-selling games of the year so far on Steam. And they've listed 12 here. Now, of the 12, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of 12. So that gives us about 33% of the best-selling games in the world for the PC are available on Linux. But I can say from my own personal experience that Grand Theft Auto works flawlessly, as does Kingdom Come Deliverance, which I showed last week. Likewise with Warframe, and that's it. I have not tried. I know that Rainbow Six Siege does not work, so that one for sure. I know that PUBG does not work, so that one for sure as well. I'm going to guess that Vermintide does work. I don't know about Far Cry 5. I know that I was not able to get Assassin's Creed Origins working on Linux, so that both are Ubisoft games. I'm going to say, for the sake of argument, that Far Cry 5 is not working yet, but I think that it will. I don't know anything about Jurassic World Evolution. Frankly, that is actually very surprising that it's on there. I don't know anything about that game. But I would say, Linux playable, guaranteed Linux playable. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of 12. So that's 2/3 of the best-selling games of the year are playable, fully playable on Linux at let's say gold or better, which is when people say that you can't play your games on Linux or it doesn't have AAA games, that's just not true. We just show right here that 2/3 of the best-selling games of the year are playable on Linux. And then if you take a look here at the gold, there's another 12 there. As I said, Assassin's Creed Origins, I don't think you can play that. I haven't been able to get it to work. But we've got Ark, Stellaris, and that's it. So a little bit kind of a fallback here. It's 3 of 12, which is 25% are native Linux games. But I know that Total War Warhammer 2 works. Witcher it works quite well. Path of Exile works very well as well, and Elder Scrolls Online and Subnautica. So, once again, the only games here that I know for sure are not working on Linux right now are Final Fantasy 15 Black Desert Online, I have not been able to get to work. Assassin's Creed Origins. So that's again 3. So that's 8 of them here are also playable on Linux. So of the gold and the platinum, we've got 75% working on Linux. Let's just take a look here at the next wave. We've got silver. And I think we're doing a little bit better here. So we've got Team Fortress, Cities, Slay the Spire. That's 3. Euro Truck. That's 4. Dying Light. That's 5. And War Thunder Project. That's 6. So that's 6 of 12. So that's 15% of those are Linux native. You know, outside of that, I know Fallout 4 works. I don't think I've played the rest. I think I'm pretty sure Arma 3 works. I've tried that one before. The Forest also works. Dark Souls 3 I've made working as well. So again, once again, Frostpunk also works. And then of course, as we go down into the the bronze level, we get much better traction down here on native games, and most of them are playable. But of this list here, so you've got all of these games: gold, silver, and bronze, and platinum. It seems to me that with a little bit of work, or Lutris, somewhere between let's say 2/3 to 3/4 of all of these games are fully playable on Linux. And I find that when we focus just on Linux native games, we actually scare off potential users because they think they're only going to be able to play 25 to 30% of the games. That is just not true. You can play easily 3/4 of these games. Now, of course, it's more complicated than that, because if you've got an AMD, it might not work as well as if you're on NVIDIA, and then if you've got Intel, and blah, blah, blah. But for me, from my use case, between my Intel APU on this XPS 13 and my NVIDIA-based card, that's what I find. Your mileage may vary on AMD, but that's pretty good. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And I think, when we're selling the idea of Linux gaming to people, I think we need to be able to tell them, and we should be telling them, that you can play 2/3 to 3/4 of the top games of the year on Linux. That's Twitch. Speaking of playing the top games on Linux, here's a game that I cannot play on Linux, and it's Linux native. Pillars of Eternity 2, which we featured as part of our giveaways, by the way, came out. I put in, as you can see, about 10 hours into it over kind of a course of some time. Moved away from it, and then came back because they had a recent patch, and they went live with it. So patch 1.0.2 is live. This was July the 3rd. And so they added a whole bunch of stuff, which was terrific. Thank you very much, including, I think, cloud saves. But it completely broke the game. I cannot play this game on Linux anymore at all. The only thing I can do is I can play it via Wine, the Windows version, on my Linux machine, which is crazy since it's a Linux native game. It does not run. It does not run on my Intel machine. It does not run on my NVIDIA machine. And if I pop in over here, you can see that I've got it installed. And I press play. And nothing happens. It says that it's running, but it will not run. It just basically dies. That's what it does. I can do it again. I can verify. I've uninstalled. I can reinstall. I can do whatever. It does not work. If I go over here, Planescape Torment, for example, I can press play over there. And this is how I should launch. Pillars of Eternity 2 does not run. And I don't know what the issue is. I have read mixed reports from other people having problems both on Linux and on Windows. There was this ridiculous thread that I looked at where I think Obsidian was basically saying you've got to take some advanced lessons in computer science to do something with your drive. I don't know, whatever. There was some incredibly complex series of steps that they advised that only the most experienced people in the world should ever try. But apparently they are working with NVIDIA. This may be an NVIDIA problem, although I have the problem here on my Intel machine as well. And I'm waiting for this to be solved. I don't know if anybody else has had this, or if any of our listeners out there have had a problem with it. If any of you have actually solved this problem, I'd certainly like to get some feedback. In fact, you know what? Well, I've got you guys here. Why don't I just kind of quickly exit, run Steam in a terminal, and let me see what error I'm getting. This is why terminals are good, Abram. Alright, so let's take a look over here. Let's run it and see what it says. Okay, Steam Library, Pillars of Eternity, Data Managed. What is it saying? Okay, so Steam Library CMAPs, it ran it in there. Data mono, etc. The assembly mscorelib.dll was not found. It should have been installed in this directory here, but it is not found. So it's missing a DLL, this mscorelib.dll. Okay, well maybe that provides me with some input in terms of how to fix it. Okay, that's something that I can look into. But whatever the case is, I shouldn't. Obsidian, come on, that's kind of stupid. In any case, if you're looking for free games, there is a really good place to get them, and that is on Twitch. If you're an Amazon Prime subscriber, Twitch is offering 19 free games in the month of July as part of, I guess, Prime Day. So you can see here, I just basically added this game Goner to my library, and then before that there was something called Manual Samuel, Battle Chef Brigade, Cubo 2, basically a bunch of games along those lines. The Warframe Trinity Prime bundle was actually pretty cool. I also got a Neverwinter Purple Owlbear pack. But the only problem here is there are a bunch of terrific games available to Amazon Prime subscribers that link their account to Twitch, and many of those games have native Linux versions available. Unfortunately, there is no native desktop app, and there is no Linux versions available for downloading. Even though there are native Linux versions available, Amazon won't make those available. I have had some success in terms of getting the Twitch desktop app to run on Linux, and I've been able to install a game or two via Wine and then run it, which is okay, but it kind of is a bit of a drag to run a game with a full Linux native version available through Wine into the Windows version. Now, one of the ironies here is that Amazon internally uses a special build of Linux rather than Windows. Yes, Amazon uses Linux, and Chrome uses a version of Linux. Not Chrome, sorry, Google uses a version of Linux internally as well. Both of those two large companies, number 2 and number 3 by market cap in the world, both use Linux internally rather than Windows or Mac. And it's just, if Amazon would just release a Linux desktop app, I mean, you would help to drive adoption of Linux as an alternative to Windows, and you would probably benefit because you have better direct access to your customer rather than having to use a system like Windows, which or Mac OS X that is geared to delivering user data to Apple or Microsoft. And I have tweeted out to Amazon suggesting this. I mean, I don't expect them to get back, to be honest, but it's unfortunate. But if you are an Amazon Prime subscriber or user, and there's 100 million Americans that are, and I don't know how many people in the rest of the world, go on over to Twitch. At least, grab your apps and your games, your freebies, and and hope for a Linux native version sometime down the road. But as I said, these games are typically the kinds of games that are fully playable through Wine anyway. Anyway, that's our news feed for today. I'm going to be back in a few seconds, and we're going to take a look at some recommended new releases right after this. Alright, let's take a look and see what's new on Steam. Thank you for sticking with us here on Mostly Gaming with Mostly Linux. What is available this week? Why don't we take a look at our Steam OS Plus Linux games recommended new releases. What are the recommended new releases? Take a look and see what Steam's algorithms are saying. Robothorium Sci-Fi Dungeon Crawler. This is already actually on my wish list, and I don't remember putting it there. So why don't we take a look?
2052. Robotics have been endowed.
Alright, so Robothorium is a futuristic turn-based RPG sci-fi dungeon crawler where all your choices will have a direct impact on your revolution against humankind. Gather your team of robots, choose your allies, and lead your troops to the next robot's age. This is June 7th. It looks interesting. It's in my wish list, so I must have seen something there. Though the reviews for it are decidedly mixed at this point. It's an early access game. I don't buy early access games. I prefer my games to be finished when I run them. What is this? This is the new girl. Pass. Alright, let's just take a look here at what's new. So we've got take care of your paperwork, which is about $2. Don't wanna. Is there anything else here? Really seek Seeds of Resilience. This looks like it might actually be a real game. Let's take a look and see what the heck this is all about. Create a village from the ground up. Build a village on a deserted island and prepare for merciless natural disasters. Learn to choose the right items, understand nature's patterns, use real medieval construction and craft techniques in this turn-based management game. It's called Seeds of Resilience. This is also an early access game, which actually, I have to say, looks kind of interesting. It came out the 4th of July. Only one user review, so it's your typical, indie type of game. It's by a company called Subtle Games. There is a Linux version native available, and it is 15% off at $13.16. This is an early access game, and I am going to add it to my wish list because it looks kind of cool. Subtle Games. All right, thanks for supporting Linux, Subtle Games. We'll keep an eye on that for when it's available. And that's it. I mean, I think the rest of the stuff here, Starlight Drifter, I think we looked at last week. That's it for the new games. The rest of them are kind of, dollar games, $2 games, which I'm not, it's not clear to me that it's worth anybody kind of focusing their time on right now. So, in terms of what I've been playing, I have not been playing Pillars of Eternity because it doesn't work. But what I have been playing is this amazing game called Final Fantasy XII Zodiac Age. Now, this is a game I bought years ago on the PlayStation 2. I still have the disc somewhere downstairs, and never finished it. For any one of many reasons, one of which is I don't really finish a lot of games. But you can see that I've put in 30 hours into this thing in the last week. It really absorbed me into it. It's your traditional JRPG. It's got a pretty cool battle system where you're effectively programming the game through the series of gambits that basically determine what your character will do given certain conditions. So, for example, if somebody is KO'd, bring them back through a raise command. If somebody has poison, cure them. Attack the beast with the lowest health, or whatever your gambit choices are. And then you kind of program it. I mean, it's kind of it can get pretty detailed. It does involve some work because if you get them wrong, you're going to die. But it's a throwback to kind of an era where not every game had to be completely open world with a billion different things to do and subquests and city building and all the other time wasters that everybody puts into the game to make it a service so that you can keep playing it forever. It's a relatively linear story-based JRPG. I haven't played a JRPG in many years, and I am really enjoying it. Outside of that, you can see here that I've got all of the Final Fantasies were on sale, so I've basically picked them all up. So there's 3, there's 4, there's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 10-2. 11 is an MMORPG, which I'm not interested in, and then there's 12, and I've got 13. 14 is another MMORPG, and 15 I bought that on the Xbox One X, which is also it's just on the Xbox One. I think I put in maybe 15 or 20 hours in Final Fantasy 15. You know what? My issue with Final Fantasy 15 is that it's a gorgeous looking game, but I can't stand any of the characters, and it's pretty hard to have a story-based game where you can't stand anybody. I like the characters in Final Fantasy 12. It is it is a terrific throwback. It reminds me of my PlayStation 2 days when I was younger and more sprightly. And yeah, that's a keeper. That's a game I'm going to finish. Yeah, I think that's it for now. Let's take a break right here, and then I'm going to come back with our focus on topic, which is the best Linux playable games so far this half year. BRB. And we're back here with our focus on topic this week, which is best games of the half year. And this is a time where we take our quarterly break to try to figure out what are the contenders for the best games of the year that are playable on Linux. Now, our definition of playable is gold or better, confirmed by us or others that have played the game. So if we think that the game is fully playable in acceptable levels of performance on Linux through Wine or Lutris or DXVK or whatever other technique you might use, then we consider that a Linux playable game. We do not consider Linux playable games those games that do not work on Linux at all, or that require a dual boot or a VR, a virtual machine. So there's other ways to basically play non-Linux playable games. We also don't include things that are played through emulation. I mean, this is typically PC-based games that you can simply, clearly, and without much of a hassle, run on Linux at near perfect performance. And that's our definition. Just before I get into that, there's a couple of things here that I want to basically just take care of. One is we were basically put onto this site by our Linux gaming compatriot. I believe his name is Skooky Sprite. He's at Vegas Writer on Twitter, and he runs a Linux gaming podcast by the name of Best Linux Games. It's quite an interesting podcast, filled with a lot of adult only content. Mostly just drug use and alcohol use and four-letter words and imaginary friends. It's actually quite disturbing at times, but oddly compelling at the same time. I do listen to it weekly, despite myself perhaps. But he does a good job. I have to say, Spooky Sprite does a lot of work, apparently, in terms of preparing for stuff, and he provides some pretty good advice. But what he did is he turned us on to this website, lorenzostanco.com/lab/Steam. You have to go through to the /lab/Steam to get to this site, because if you go only to lorenzostanco.com, you're going to get this guy's basically his job site or whatever. But for those of you on the audio, it is lorenzostanco.com, LORENZOstanco.com/lab/Steam. And what this does is it gives you an amazing number of filters for taking a look through your library. And you can sort by pretty well anything that you want. If you want to find, the playtime, so which games have I played the most, it'll just basically sort them, and it'll tell me that I've spent 1,571 hours in Civilization 5. I don't even know if I want to look at this. 794 hours in Dark Souls 2. and then another 479 hours in Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin. So that's almost 1,300 hours of Dark Souls 2 and another 480 hours in Dark Souls 3. I think I like Dark Souls. What do you guys think? XCOM 2 is another 400 hours. You can see which games are kind of at the top of my list. But you know, aside from that, there is you know, games that you recently played. You can sort your games by Metascore. So the highest Metascore game that I have is BioShock, which is a 96, followed by Grand Theft Auto 5 and Half-Life. You can sort them by user rating, which I find is a better indicator of what my, you know, what generally kind of ties better with what I think of the games. And with respect to that user rating, wow, BattleTech, user rating of 100. I have not played BattleTech at all, but that's actually pretty impressive. So anyway, that's this site. It provides you an incredible amount of information on your personal Steam library. You do have to set your settings to public in order to be able to use the game, given Steam's recent changes. But you know, if that's an issue for you, just switch it to public. You know, come on and then switch it back. LorenzoStanko.com/lab/Steam. Definitely worth a checkout. The other one that I just kind of noticed was, of course, SteamDB, which has added. Oh, did I just move it away? What they have added here to SteamDB is an option here that you can see up at the very top. It says, "Play games on Linux? Help us by confirming which games work for you." And if you can kind of click on there, you can link your account, and you can basically say games are marked as working by humans on GitHub by creating a pull request. Alternative, just press "It Works" button on a game and commit will be created for you. So this basically just tells you can basically provide information through to GitHub through SteamDB here, and provide information on what games are working on Linux. And I believe this also includes games that may be working on Linux through Steam. Through Wine. So yeah, I mean, if you know, you'll be doing some good for the community if you just go on over there and link your library and just click on the ones that work for you well. In any case, let's go to our 25 best PC games as reported by Metacritic and see how we are doing on Linux for the best games so far this year. And the number one game so far, according to Metascores, is Into the Breach, which is a terrific game. I have not finished it. I do have the game. It is not available as a native Linux game right now, but it is 100% playable at I would say effectively the same frame rates as under Windows. For all intents and purposes, go to Lutris, click on it, and it will run. It is as close as you can get to being native without it being native. Number two is Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, which, as you know, is Linux native, but I can't run it. But that is probably my game of the year so far, even though with only 10 hours. But, you know, I'm going to have to finish it before I'm going to make a determination at the end of the year. And in order for me to be able to finish it, it has to work. Game number three is Celeste, which is also Linux native. Terrific game. I have it, but I haven't played it. But I did. But my son has played it and given me the thumbs up there as well. Number four is Subnautica. This would be my son's top game of the year. It's got a Metascore of 87. Likewise, this is not Linux native, but fully playable on Linux. Number five is Iconoclast, which I believe is also Linux native. Let's just kind of hop in here. I do not have this game, but Icono Class is $25. And yes, it does have a Linux native version. So we're doing pretty well here. The first 5 games, all playable on Linux, with 3 of them being native and 2 being, I would rank them as platinum Linux games. Number 6 is Final Fantasy XII: The Zodiac Age, which I was talking about. I'm waxing poetic. This launches under Linux, and it runs reasonably well. It is a little glitchy. I have run it under Linux. There are some issues with the controller support. If you're going to play it using KBM, it's fully playable. But if you're going to play it using a controller, I have not been able to get it to work. So I'm going to say that this game is not Linux playable and disqualified from our Linux list. Final Fantasy 15, likewise, I've not been able to get that to work. I believe that uses some kind of de novo copyright protection that prevents it from playing. Dragon Ball FighterZ, or Fighter Z, I know nothing about that game. Batman: The Enemy Within, I do not believe is playable on Linux, and in any case, I don't think I'd ever put a game, one of those games on my best games. I mean, these games, the Telltale games, have been the same thing for like 10 years now, and I don't know, maybe you gotta mix it up a little bit. Full Metal Furies, I think it's a relatively new game. Is that Linux native? Full Metal Furies is $22. Yeah, it's a Linux native version of it. It's very positive. It's from the creators of Rogue Legacy. Okay, I remember this game. Looks interesting, and that is number 10 in terms of the reviews. Let's go to the go to the top 15. So number 11 is Frostpunk, which I believe is that early access. I know that there is no Linux port because I have been talking to the developers and telling them that they should bring out a Linux version. They've been non-committal, unfortunately, and I'm not inclined to buy this game for Windows and play it via line. $34. Is it early access? Let's verify my age. No, it's not early access. This has been getting quite a bit of attention over the last little while. It is fully playable on Linux. I have no interest in getting it for Windows, however. Wreckfest and so forth. I think, let's just kind of go back up. I'm going to focus on the top 10. So for me, the top 10, I'm going to say, and again, this is not necessarily in the order that they're listed here on Metacritic, but I would say Into the Breach, Pillars, Celeste, Subnautica, Iconoclast, Full Metal Furies, Frostpunk maybe. I know it's fully playable. It's got an 84. Total War Warhammer 2: Rise of the Tomb Kings. That's going to come after Linux native. The other games have been ported over, and the Total War games are typically ported over by Feral. I'm sure that one's going to come out as well. Dark Souls Remastered is also fully playable in Linux, and I've played it in Linux for quite some time. So having a blast there. I don't know if I would include remastered games in terms of the top 10. My personal top games, I would say, are Pillars of Eternity 2, if that works, Into the Breach, and Subnautica right now. Those are the 3 top games, probably in the following order: Pillars, Subnautica, Into the Breach. So you know what? Aside from the fact that we determined earlier on that 2/3 to 3/4 of the best-selling games of the year on Steam are fully playable on Linux. And if we take a look at the best games of the year so far on Metacritic, and we see that of the top 10, a bunch of them, I think 8 of them, are fully playable on Linux. That's 80%. The only 2 that are not fully playable are the 2 Final Fantasies. You know what? We're doing pretty well. I mean, Linux is if we kind of break the this idea that it has to be native, the no tucks, no bucks, and just basically say from a practical perspective, what games can I play on Linux? You can play 8 of the top 10 games. In terms of the highest ranked games of the year on Metacritic for the PC, you can play 8 of them perfectly in Linux right now. And of the best-selling games on Steam, anywhere between 2/3 and 3/4, you can play them right now. That's pretty good for our little operating system. I mean, that's really good. And that's the message we should give people, because that is the fact that matters. I'll be right back in 10 seconds and we'll wrap up this show. And we're here at the tail end of episode number 15.15 of Mostly Gaming. And let's just take a couple of minutes here to give you some of our credentials. At mostly_Linux, if you're looking to find us on Twitter, that's where we are most of the time, at mostly_Linux. Please feel free to follow us there. If you want to check us out on Reddit, we have our own subreddit. It is Mostly Linux. And let's go on over there and see what it looks like. And I'm having trouble finding it here. And I'm tired. I'm supposed to be on vacation. And what the heck am I doing recording this instead? Here it is. It's r/mostly_Linux. And what you will find if you go there is a community of about 44 subscribers so far. I'd like to get that number a little greater, but you'll see that all of our giveaways, all of our discussions, all of our topics are posted here first. We're also on Linux_gaming, but really would appreciate it if you would just follow us here on Mostly_Linux. So you know what else we have? We have a Steam group, also by the same name, the Mostly_Linux Steam community. We have about 45 members right now. You can see there's 7 in chat right now. There's a couple in game. It is a terrific, open, accessible community of gamers. If you want a game with cool people and they're not gonna, give you, Nazi statements or homophobic stuff or whatever. If you don't want to play with really cool people, come on over to Mostly_Linux. Join our group. Send out some friend invites. We also give away games here occasionally. I was giving away games on the giveaway just to members of our group. I'd pop into their wish list, find the game that they liked, and then just send it on over. It's a terrific community. We are there to basically have some Linux BFFs so that we can play games with people that aren't crazy. And then finally, in terms of our place on the web with respect to this podcast, mostlylinux.libsyn. Let me just get this here correct on the screen and apologize for the guys on audio as I type it out. mostlylinux.libsyn.com. That's LIBSYN. mostlylinux.libsyn.com is our podcast landing page on the web, and here you can subscribe. If you're listening to this, why don't you subscribe? You can follow us on Twitter. You can send us an email. You can get our RSS feed. You can subscribe to us through Apple Podcasts, through Stitcher, through Google. We're also on YouTube. We're on Twitch. Find us somewhere out there. Tell your friends. Hey, let's get this community a little bit bigger. I think we've got, I haven't checked recently, but last I checked there was over 100 subscribers to our audio podcast alone, which is pretty good for, for a little burgeoning startup community. Certainly would like to get that up to 1,000, hopefully by the end of the summer. And maybe you can help by letting a few people know. I am not going to stick like a Patreon and beg you for money and tell you to go to my Amazon link and give me some free stuff. And, we give free stuff away rather than ask for you to give us free stuff. And I don't begrudge anybody that wants to make a living doing this, but we do it for fun. And I hope that you enjoy it. And I hope that you'll come back for episode 16. And I'm looking forward to doing this again, same time next week. Take care.